So Ken, did you have any emergencies in the PR9?
Actually, in my time on the squadron, I was quite lucky. We didn't have, really anything go wrong. We had, I think, a couple of engine failures, but they're not that bad. In fact, with engine failure, the Canberra has a very bad rep for asymmetric. Because of the widely spread engines, then it means that if you lose an engine, there's an endeavour by the airplane to roll. And if that happens at low level, of course, you're going to crash unless you can correct it very quickly. And so as navigators, you're normally fat, dumb and happy, assuming that the pilot can do this quite easily. The mistake you make as a nav is flying in the front of the T4. And I flew, my pilot, John Clemens, was the QFI, the qualified flying instructor. And so I went up in the T4 with him in the right-hand seat. And he said, oh, have a go at asymmetric. It's only at that point you realise how difficult it actually is. Up to that point, I was fat, dumb and happy to think it was easy. Now I decided it's not maybe a safe thing to go and do. So other than that, no real emergencies in the PR9. A few bird strikes and things, and all birds smell of fried chicken when they get on the engine. Every bird smells the same. But no significant key damage for that. Tornado, different. I had a few incidents of tornado, but not in this.
So was the PR9 the right aircraft for the job at the time when you were flying it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was a phenomenal airplane. We had two of the airplanes had a thing called System 3, which was basically a U2 camera for long-range oblique photography. Only two carried it. And so the idea with that being you could then take photographs a long way away. So we had a photograph in the squadron crew room of Big Ben, the clock tower in London. And we'd stand visitors there and say, look, you can read the time, what a great photo. And they go, so what? You can read the time. Yes, but it's taken from the Isle of Wight. 55,000 feet over the Isle of Wight. And that's how good the imaging was. And so there are a number of standard places around the world where we did regular, looking sideways, shall we say.
How did the RAF see, from other types, see the Canberra?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because I remember when I left the squadron in 1982, because they were taking the squadron down to half size, and they decided that they didn't need this many Canberras. The Canberra was going to go out of service in 5 years' time. We applied in 1980 for self-defense systems, the BOSPOD, because it's got the hard points on the wings, which you never had on most of the Canberras, but this one kept the hard points from the BI-8. And so we could actually put BOSPODs on the wings. We had a radar warning receiver fitted in the late 70s, but that was it. And we were told, no, there's no money, it's an old airplane, it's going out of service by 1985, 86, forget it. So I end up on tornadoes. I end up going then in the early 90s with a recce tornado squadron, 2 squadron out to the Gulf. And of course we had the TER system, which is optimized for very, very low level night and bad weather. And we're sitting in a debrief one day, and we have F-14 TARPS imagery, and we have our imagery. And our imagery was a handheld camcorder, because we had to fly at 10, 20,000 feet. So our OC Rick had gone down to the local market and bought a couple of camcorders. And so we're kind of leaning over the side like World War One, taking fix on a camcorder. And this general comes and he says, no, this is ridiculous. Or Air Vice Marshal came and he said, this is crazy. How come the F-14s can do this and we can't? And I said to the guy, look, if you want proper imagery, bring a PR9 out.
Right.
And he went, we can't bring an old airplane. It'd be embarrassing. This was 1991. By 2006, the Americans in particular couldn't get enough of this airplane. This particular one, 135, was the last Canberra over Afghanistan. Oh, wow. First over Afghanistan and the last. The Michelin marks aren't on it anymore, but the Gulf II Michelin marks are still on the jet. So the imagery was phenomenal. By that stage, it's not the imagery I had with my F-96 and things. Now you're into very advanced sensors and a real-time data link to the ground, and a bunch of self-defense systems. So all the things we'd asked for back in the early 80s, and we're told you couldn't have, the jet's too old, by the early 2000s, they were there. When they dropped the squadron in 2006, there were a lot of people saying, you can't replace this. And there is stuff. The Air Force had nothing after it gone.
Because the platform's solid, obviously.
So like all airplanes, it's all about the platform. If you can keep updating the platform's capability with sensors and weapons, it continues to be valid. Same with Tornado. When I first started flying Tornado in 1982 on 9 Squadron, it was pretty much an electric Vulcan. We were dropping dumb 1,000-pound bombs with a slightly smarter system and some ability to defend yourself. By the time the airplane when I left in 1994, we had LGBs and the tile pod. By the time that the aircraft went out of service in 2019, it was 10 times more capable. Jet's the same. The engine's the same. Airframe's the same. It's the sensors and weapons that are giving you that massive change in capability.
Absolutely. And did you ever interact with the U2 crews?
We did. We didn't talk a lot about it, but we did, because of the nature of what we did, we would interact with the guys at Alconbury and in Cyprus.
Nice. So can you share a few memorable stories from your time on PR9? I'm sure you've got plenty.
I mean, that's one thing about all the Canberra bit is just full of stories. I mean, to say we had an event here yesterday with about 40 odd guys, ground crew and air crew along, and so the stories were flowing all over the place, ground crew and air crew alike. So I mean, I always say when I give people talks on this aeroplane that one of the headlines that could have been in 1980 around the world was RAF spy plane shot down over Vietnam. I go, what? Yeah, because I've been in Hong Kong on detachment with the aircraft and my pilot. We were coming out of Hong Kong, and as you leave Hong Kong, you make one turn to parallel the coast of Vietnam. And so we'd made that turn, and about half an hour later, I wake up and I go, oh, hey, John, I've been asleep. All I can hear is from the back, we've both been asleep. So if we'd fallen asleep before the turn, we'd have gone over Vietnam at 45,000 feet, probably been shot down, and of course it wouldn't have been two idiots fell asleep in the airplane, it was RAF spying on Vietnam. A headline that never was but could have been.
Any more stories you can share?
Yeah, I mean there are lots of stories that come around with this airplane in general, you know, because the Canberra had so many good stories. You can see behind us that where the nose opens that you then have to step out of the airplane down onto the ground. We had one flight commander on the squadron who thought we weren't doing it in a good way. He thought we could be better in the way we stepped out of the airplane. It didn't look neat. So one of the guys actually put a dinner jacket on under his flying suit, and when they came back after the sortie, he'd arranged for the ground crew to wear white overalls, and you wear white overalls to meet VIPs, and to come up with a small set of steps. And we'd also arranged for this flight commander to be near that aircraft at the time. So he's in his car sitting by that, and he sees these guys walking out with these white overalls and a pair of steps, and the guy in the nose, it wasn't me, it was somebody else, had actually taken his flying suit off, and as they put the steps down and opened the nose, he walked down the steps with his eagle and he went, "Is that better?"
That's brilliant.
But the best one of all, I think, is that the PR9 was the only RAF Canberra to have an autopilot.
Ah.
And because you have the hole down the right-hand side where the entranceway normally was, the pilot can put in the autopilot, push the fuel tray to one side, and climb down the hole. Mm. So when you're flying over France, on your flight plan, you put a word called embellish, and embellish means come get me. And I'm open to be intercepted. So you're flying at 50,000 feet over France, and the French will always come and overgo you. So when you know the French guy is coming up after you, the Mirage is coming up to you, he puts the autopilot in and straps, climbs down the hole. So when the Mirage appears on the wing, the airplane is empty. It's a Marie Celeste Canberra. So he goes across to the other wing and looks. Again, it's empty. And I can see him, I'm looking at the window at this guy, so I say to the pilot, "About now." So he leans up from the hole, waves, and then goes back down the hole again. You know, and of course there are legions and legions of stories that go on with the PR9.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've heard some great stories, maybe you can share a few, where Lightnings have tried to turn with the Canberra and it just outturns them.
Yeah, well, I mean, because it's a big wing. So for us, again, two things. The engine is big as well. So the normal Canberra engine was £6,500 for us, £7,500 for some of the others. This is 11,250. It's a Lightning engine without reheat. It's an Avon 206. Yeah. So you've got a lot of power. We only ever take off with 90% power, never 100% power. And that's partly to do with safety, with asymmetric loss and things. So you've got a lot of power there, and the big wing, if you get slower down to 240 knots, will outturn almost anything. So again, if we went and did some playtime with Lightnings, then yes, you would be able to slow down and outturn the Lightning. When he worked it out, he'd still get you eventually, but he wouldn't get you easily.